will not be successful. If you want to run an organization that's both in command and in control in the military, maybe it's a small squad of 10 to 12 men. Or it might be a corner grocery store. You might be in control, but any large modern organization, you have to be out of control. Now there's a subtitle to this, and that's how to achieve your purpose. That's a very deliberate use of a word, and I will come back to that word near the end. And I think I'm obligated to give you some tools you can use, not entertain you or just provide information. So that word purpose, or a synonym intent, will be something we discuss at the end. This presentation, though, could have another title, and it would be Decision Making in Modern Organizations. Bob got a hold of me, as he indicated, after reading Blink. And of course, that chapter, if you had a chance to look at it, talks about an exercise that was conducted by the Joint Forces Command, which is located in Norfolk, Virginia. The Joint Forces Command is a very large organization, has a lot of responsibilities, but one part of it is designed to experiment with new concepts, new ideas, new equipment for joint forces, meaning Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps all working together. This particular exercise was called Millennium Challenge 2002. It cost $250 million of our taxpayers' money. It was a year in development, but it had another exercise the previous year that was a run-up to it, and several before that contributed to it. So you could say there were almost 4 years of thinking and design behind this. Malcolm Gladwell, from my point of view, puts a very favorable light on my contributions to that particular exercise. The command, as you might imagine, has a different view. In fact, they will tell you, we knew this guy, Van Riper, was a cowboy. We contracted him to come in here, and sure enough, he came in and screwed up our exercise. Well, the reality is I'd been down in that command for 4 years, ran every previous exercise, including this one called Unified Quest, the one the year before, that had many of the same similarities. I had role-played the Red Commander for 2 years. I knew the country inside and out. The team I had was a first-class team, some of the finest folks I've ever worked with. So this was not a lash-up where I walked in and threw a few rocks into the wheels and messed it up. It was a much more fundamental problem. They were testing a concept. The name of that concept was effects-based operations. I had a lot of problem with that to begin with. I always thought the American public would be surprised that its military, after more than 200 years of existence, was finally trying to base its operations on the effects or results you intended to achieve. You mean we did operations in the past and we weren't worried about the results or the consequences? So to me, it was the idea was nonsense. But other than that cliche or phrase of effects-based operations, what really was behind it was something called operational net assessment, which was another name that didn't really describe what they were doing. It was systems analysis of warfare. The same thing that as a young officer I'd been through with Mr. McNamara to the disasters we had in Vietnam. Well, what is this operational net assessment? The hubris of this is unbelievable. What they argued in this concept was that enemies are divided up into systems. And that we would look at these systems of systems individually and understand them, and then we'd understand the interaction between the systems. And they arbitrarily said they were political, military, economic, social, infrastructure, and information. Now, unfortunately, far too few of our folks in uniform speak English, so this terrible acronym became known as PAMISI. For whatever reason, they looked at the U.S. and said, we have a different way to approach this. It's diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, DIME. And I heard these conversations of our DIME against their PAMISI, and I'd almost gag. Can we not speak real English? But what they were saying is, inside of a political system, using this concept, which nodes to take out to achieve a certain effect. Moreover, we'd understand how the political and military systems and economic and informational, et cetera, all linked together. And doing something in one system, we could understand what was going to happen in another system. And I used to say to them, they don't call economics the dismal science for nothing. And if this was feasible, why wouldn't we use these wonderful tools you have to fine-tune our own economy? And beside economics, an economic system, what are you talking about? Is it the banking system, the markets, the transportation, production? I mean, it's so amorphous of an idea. So at the beginning of the exercise, the team that I had, I said, we will use none of this nonsense. We're simply going to base it on our own experience and good judgment, and we will have discourses about the problem. In those discourses, we will come to conclusions of what we should do and move forward. And as you read in the book, about 3 days into the exercise, it was very disastrous for the Blue Forces. This was all simulation in some wonderful models, 47 models kludged together. So, for example, I could walk in and look in a screen that showed an aircraft with a missile coming off the rails, off the wings of that, go over to a naval system and watch that missile fly into it and either hit a ship or not. And the same with the ground. And they're all kludged together, so a lot of fidelity. And what that system showed was, in the outset, we sank 16 major American ships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, amphibs, never been done in an exercise, shocked the whole system, and for about almost 2 days, nothing happened. Now, in an exercise or experiment like this, you don't stop when one side wins. You kind of pause, say, what was the reason for this? Gain your data, reset the game, and start over. That's not what took place. They were absolutely convinced that these concepts had merit. So rather than have a free play where red and blue had freedom to play the game, they began to script it, and actually took me out of the picture. And I was going to walk out that day, and I said, no, if I walk out and ever make a complaint, they'll say, well, you were only here for the first 3 days. You weren't here for the whole 3 weeks. I probably would never have said anything about it if they had not told congressional staffers and told the media that this was still a free play exercise in which red and blue had equal opportunities to succeed. I may not even said anything if at the end they had not concluded and reported to Congress that this exercise proved this concept of effects-based operations and operational net assessment and began to foist these ideas off onto the active forces. Let me assure you, in the 41 years I was on active duty, I never saw anything as dysfunctional, as dishonest as this particular exercise. So I don't want to alarm you that your American military normally does this. I can't explain why, except some reputations were tied up in this particular idea, and it's still there. I knew the media would have some interest in it, and I said to myself, I won't be interviewed by any of the broadcast media because they tend to sensationalize. But if the print media asks me questions, I'm going to answer all the questions they ask me. This was an event in the military channels, got a lot of notoriety, but I'm sure the general public didn't know much about it. I often wonder if you had a major event, what it's like to be part of that with the media, because I would get somewhere between 25 and 30 phone calls a day, and some of them from as far away as Norway, Germany, the UK, and obviously all over the United States. And after 3 weeks of this, my wife could answer the questions because I'd repeated it so many times when folks would call, and it's getting a little annoying. And I get a phone call from a fellow named Malcolm Gladwell. And he says he's with the New Yorker magazine, and he'd like to interview me. And I said, well, I'm not planning on coming to New York anytime soon. He said, no, I'll come to wherever you are. I said, well, I live down in Williamsburg, Virginia. What's a good date? I gave him a couple dates. We picked one.